for months, even years, the argument was that Joe Biden was sharp, he could clearly do the job, and the minute that he performed poorly in that debate and he became political dead weight, you have Kamala Harris and everybody else trying to throw him overboard. But I think the more troubling question is, why did so many senior Democrats, including the vice president, cover for him? And if Joe Biden wasn't capable of doing the job, as even a lot of Democrats say now, was Kamala Harris in charge or was somebody else in charge? And that's a real issue.
There's no evidence that Kamala Harris threw him overboard, but I want to move on to...
That look right there is JD realizing full well that this interview with CNN is really just with Kamala Harris's spokespeople. Now watch this clip of Joe Biden and then tell me that Kamala Harris, amongst others, did not throw Biden overboard.
Look, the polls we had showed that it was a neck-and-neck race. Would have been down to the wire. But what happened was a number of my Democratic colleagues in the House and Senate thought that I was going to hurt them in the races. And I was concerned if I stayed in the race, that would be the topic. You'd be interviewing me about why did...
something that Governor Walz has called you and Donald Trump, and that is weird.
Sure.
And it is taken off. The New York Times reports that when Donald Trump was asked about it, he said, "Not me, they're talking about JD."
Well, certainly they've levied that charge against me more than anybody else, but I think that it drives home how they're trying to distract from their own policy failures. I mean, look, this is fundamentally schoolyard bully stuff. They can accuse me of whatever they want to accuse me of. As Harry S. Truman once said, if you can't take the heat, stay out of the kitchen. And I'm doing this because I think that me being vice president will help improve people's lives. So I accept their attacks, but I think that it is a little bit of projection, Dana. If you think about just take a couple of days ago. Tim Walz gives this big speech. He's been announced as the VP nominee. And I remember when I had just been announced as the VP nominee, I gave my big speech and I saw my wife and I gave her a big hug and a kiss because I love my wife and I think that's what a normal person does. Tim Walz gave his wife a nice, firm Midwestern handshake and then tried to sort of awkwardly correct for it. So I think that what it is two people, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, who aren't comfortable in their own skin because they aren't comfortable with their policy positions for the American people. And so they're name calling instead of actually telling the American people how they're going to make their lives better. I think that's weird, Dana, but look, they can call me whatever they want to.
You're saying Tim Walz doesn't have affection for his wife? I don't even understand that.
So Dana Bash had established an aura of professionalism to start this interview, then proceeds to gaslight JD and say, "I don't even understand that," which is a very casual tone, almost letting out her actual beliefs when a CNN interview should be, and was, the gold standard of journalism. CNN interviews used to be a place where American people could go and tune in and get the truth so that they could make informed decisions. Instead, we're seeing firsthand why CNN's viewership has plunged to a 33-year low, and why their parent company has lost $10 billion in a single quarter. Nobody you know shakes their wife's hand like that. It's fundamentally weird because it's unsettling and unusual, which is literally the definition of weird. So we shouldn't even really be talking about this, but we are because Kamala and the Democrats have decided that their campaign strategy can't be about policies because they have none, and instead it's about cheap insults.
Their entire campaign has not been about, here's our policy for how we're going to make your life better, or here's what's wrong with Donald Trump and J.D. Vance's policies. We're going to name call and hope that you don't notice that we don't have an agenda. That is the entire Democrat approach to this election.
They have done both. They have both policies, and they are trying to define you as well.
If you go to Kamala Harris's campaign page right now, they still don't have a policy.
Well, let's talk about policy
positions
versus
about what they're going to do. I think that's really insulting to America.
Because if she says she's going to do stuff differently than Joe Biden, she's clearly acknowledging that they were all failed policies and she stood by them. And then if she's going to do the same things as Joe Biden, then the American people know that they can't stomach another 4 years no matter who she's running against. So she's between a rock and a hard place. Now, J.D. Vance is about to parry CNN's toughest attack. Check this out.
You have been on the campaign trail questioning Tim Walz's military record. You say it was shameful that Governor Walz retired from the military before his unit deployed to Iraq. I want to read you something that Joe Eustace, who is a veteran, he served with Governor Walz, said. He said that's a lie. He said he was as good a soldier as you'll find. I'm not trying to defend him. I hope people don't think that. What I'm trying to do is defend someone who served his country. I'm not voting for him. I'll campaign against him, but I don't think it's fair to characterize his service the way they have. Governor Walz served 24 years.
Sure.
He even stayed after he could have retired because of 9/11, more than the country asked of him. Do you honor his service?
Well, of course, Dana, I honor his service, and I've never criticized what Tim Walz did when he was in the military. I criticized his retirement decision, and most importantly, Dana, I criticized his lying about his own record, okay? This is a guy who was captured on video saying, I carried a gun in war. He never went to war.
We can make sure we don't have reciprocal carry among states, and we can make sure that those weapons of war that I carried in war is the only place where those weapons are at.
This is a guy who's been captured on video. As other people say, he's an Afghanistan veteran. He's a veteran of a war, nodding along in agreement instead of saying, no, 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 I did serve my country and I did it honorably, but I never went to a war zone. I'm not criticizing Tim Walz's service. I'm criticizing the fact that he lied about his service for political gain, Dana. Now, I served in the United States Marine Corps, and you know this. And look, there are a lot of things that I'm proud about. I've never lied about what I did or overstated it because it would be beneficial to me in an election. I think that's what Tim Walz did. That's what I was criticizing. And yes, I do think it's scandalous behavior.
You talked about one of the things that he said, weapons of war. He was talking in a campaign stop about, he was trying to talk about gun control.
Sure.
And he said, weapons of war I carried in war. I will say that the Harris-Walz campaign did say that the governor misspoke there.
Sure.
Do you accept that?
He misspoke sounds a lot like when I was in elementary school and my mom would ask if I did my homework, to which I'd reply that I did. Then she finds out from my teacher that I didn't, and my defense would be that I misspoke. That actually wasn't my defense, though. I'd own up to it because somehow in second grade I had more maturity than Tim Walz.
He misspoke. Another word is that he lied about it, and he didn't correct the record for 15 years until he was put under political pressure because I called it out, Dana. Whatever you want to call it, a misspeaking or a lie, I think Tim Walz should have to correct the record. Now, you pointed out a soldier who defended his service. There have been a number of soldiers who served with Tim Walz who have criticized him on the exact same grounds that I have because it's not right to misstate or to embellish what you've done, and I think that's what he did.
My X feed is filled with people who served with Walz who said that he did bail on the war to run for Congress. They are not happy with Walz, and the only soldier that CNN could find that said anything remotely positive about Walz even prefaced it by saying, I'm not defending him, and he's not even voting for him. There's also an amazing trend of soldiers showing pictures of them in a war zone saying, here's a photo of me not being Tim Walz. It's getting so rough for the Harris campaign that they actually went onto the website and changed his military record. One of the great many things that we have to look forward to is that Tim Walz is going to have to debate J.D. Vance. There's really not enough popcorn in the world to have during that.
And on the question of when he left the National Guard, he filed his election paperwork February 10th, 2005. That was a month before the National Guard even announced that it was possible that they would deploy to Iraq, and it ended up being 2 months. He retired 2 months before they actually got the paperwork.
But on CNN last night, Dana, one of the people who was actually in charge of him said they knew they were going to deploy to Iraq in February of 2004, fall of 2004. So he knew he was going to Iraq. He decided to quit, to retire, whatever word you want to use.
Retire.
Because he wanted to run for Congress. He lied about that. He said that when he decided to retire, he did not know that he was going to Iraq. That is another untruth, as even his senior military officer said. So again, I'm not criticizing the service, I'm criticizing the dishonesty. Dishonesty spoken in favor and for the purpose of political benefit. And I think that the most important thing here, Dana, is it goes to Kamala Harris's judgment. Tim Walz is ultimately going to be the vice president. Kamala Harris is in great health. I'm sure she's going to be president if she wins for 4 or maybe even 8 years. Why did Kamala Harris choose a person who has lied about their military service? I think that is a serious lapse in judgment. And I don't want to hear from a campaign spokesperson of Kamala Harris. I want to hear Kamala Harris herself address what I just said.
You know, I've seen a lot of statements from veterans, including those you served with, saying it's just untoward to be criticizing somebody who served for 24 years.
Dana, I'm not interested in the ad hominem. I've heard from a lot of veterans groups who criticize Tim Walz. The question is He said he served in war, and he didn't. That is a dishonesty. I couldn't care less what one or the other person says about it. I care about what the truth is. The truth is that Tim Walz didn't tell the truth. And importantly, Dana, this is about Kamala Harris's judgment. And I think that when you ask, why has Kamala Harris allowed the border to be wide open? Why has Kamala Harris supported policies that have promoted the increase in inflation? I think it goes to the heart of her judgment, and I think that that's what we should be talking about.
One last question.
Here, JD is going to showcase some of the best interview prep that I've ever seen. Now, it might be obvious to prepare for a question like this, but it's the kind of question that if he didn't have a good answer for it, it could have ended their entire campaign. Watch this masterclass.
Last question. Donald Trump didn't serve in the military. He received a medical draft deferment for bone spurs to avoid serving in the Vietnam War, reportedly as a favor to his father. Do you find that shameful, too?
I think that Donald Trump didn't serve in the military, but he didn't lie about it, Dana. I've known Donald Trump for a long time. He really honors our veterans. He honors me for my service. Donald Trump didn't lie about serving in the military. He didn't say that he went to Vietnam when he didn't. This is the problem. I don't criticize anybody. Whether they served our country or not, I think it's honorable to serve, but obviously a lot of people have reasons for not serving. I criticize somebody for embellishing their record, for lying, saying, I went to war. Dana, do you think that it's a problem that he said, I went to war, but he didn't actually? That seems to be a problem to me.
Well, they've corrected that. Let's move on to...
They've corrected it by admitting that he lied.
Let's move on to another important issue to voters.
I removed the part about them talking about women getting an A because the video could get taken down. Now, here JD is realizing that the Harris campaign has nothing new to offer to criticize him on. He can rest easy knowing that there's nothing new to fight. Whereas for Tim Walz, it seems like every day there's something new about his actual record that is terrifying. Be it his drunk driving arrest, or that he made sure illegal immigrants could get driver's license, which makes it possible to vote. Maybe it doesn't come as a surprise, but only Democrat states have given illegal immigrants driver's license, so that's interesting. So with thousands of Americans putting up TikToks of their cat listening to J.D. Vance saying childless cat ladies rule this country, let's see how he defends against it.
Well,
all that I've
if
ever
you want to
said,
be pro-family,
please.
I want to, because you do criticize, as you just did, the Democratic Party for being anti-family.
I do.
You called out Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg in particular. Kamala Harris has 2 stepchildren. Pete Buttigieg and his husband have adopted twins. Do you recognize them as parents and more broadly as being part of families?
Well, of course I do, Dana. I mean, you know my life story. I was actually raised. I was raised, but Dana, I was raised.
By name.
The truth is that JD did call them out by name. I found the original clip, and I can let you decide for yourself, of course, if you think JD is accusing Kamala and Pete for being childless.
So they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. And it's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children. And how does it make any sense that we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a direct stake in it? I just wanted to ask that question. One of the first people that I gave a hug to after my RNC convention speech was my stepmom, who's been an incredibly important person in my life.
So she's not childless.
My kids call her Mamaw. Of course she's not childless, but again,
you called her that.
The criticism, I certainly did not call my own stepmother childless.
Kamala Harris.
I criticized Kamala Harris for being part of a set of ideas that exists in American leadership that is anti-family. I never, Dana, criticized people for not having kids. I criticize people for being anti-child. And I do think that Kamala Harris has made some bizarre statements. She has said things like, it's reasonable not to have children over climate change. I think it's the exact opposite message we should be sending to our young families.
This is another tough one, and while I agree with JD, I still want to show you guys the original clip. Kamala was talking about the reservations that young people have for having kids today.
I've heard young leaders talk with me about a term they've coined called climate anxiety. Right? Which is fear of the future and the unknown, of whether it makes sense for you to even think about having children, whether it makes sense for you to think about aspiring to buy a home, because what will this climate be?
I think that people with these reservations do have a room temperature IQ, but it doesn't change the fact that Kamala was technically conveying other people's concerns. But she doesn't have to bring up these concerns because it legitimizes and amplifies this completely nonsense reason for not having children. I've met a lot of smart young people, and and none of them have climate anxiety. Even the ones that think we're not going to have a planet in 100 years are still living their life to the fullest.
I want to expand the child tax credit. I want to stop those surprise medical bills. I want to make housing more affordable so that if you have a young family, you can actually afford to put them in a home. And I think that it is unfortunate that so much of our public leadership has become anti-family. One final point on this, Dana, if you go back to the COVID era, one thing that really frustrated me and motivated some of these comments is we were at a point where we were kicking kids out of school. We were masking 3-year-olds and putting the masks back on them, even as they were trying to rip them off at school. I think that if we had more people who took the right perspective and had a little bit more understanding of how little kids actually operate, we would not have made so many of those mistakes during COVID.
That's a whole nother conversation because
No,
people
it's
didn't know.
related to this
because people didn't know as much because it was literally a novel
sure,
virus.
But Danny, you asked me about okay. You've now asked me 3 questions about comments that I made 3 years ago. I wonder what Kamala Harris thinks about the fact that she supported policies that opened the American southern border. I wonder what Kamala Harris thinks about the fact that she lied to the American people about Joe Biden's middle facility for the office. You are interviewing me, Dana, because I respect the American people enough to sit down for an interview.
I appreciate that.
Kamala Harris has been the nominee for 3 weeks. She hasn't sat down for a real interview.
Believe me, we are asking.
This is what I call an indefensible attack from JD, confronting CNN point blank, saying that Kamala hasn't done an interview for 3 weeks. I thought Dana might actually say something like, well, she's still figuring out her policy, and when she does, we'll interview her. But then I thought even for CNN, that's too far. So well done to JD for going on a left news source and telling their audience that their candidate has not been transparent with them because things like this win elections.
You're not going to get a disagreement there.
But the point is, Dana, you've got me for 15 minutes or however long you have me. We should be talking about public policies that matter. How are we going to lower inflation? How are we going to reduce the cost of food and housing? How are we going to close down that southern border? We've talked so little about that. We've talked a lot more about a sarcastic remark I made 3 years ago.
Okay, one last question.
Please.
And I can't believe I have to ask you this, but I do, because Donald Trump has been attacking Kamala Harris's racial identity.
He has not been, but ask your question.
Well, he questioned her racial identity. He said a number of years ago she happened to turn black. Her father is Jamaican. Do you believe Kamala Harris is black?
I believe that Kamala Harris is whatever she says she is, but I believe importantly that President Trump is right that she's a chameleon. She pretends to be one thing in front of one audience. She pretends to be something different in front of another audience. Look, Dana, she's not running a political campaign. She's running a movie. She only speaks to voters behind a teleprompter. Everything is scripted. She doesn't have her policy positions out there. She hasn't answered why she wanted to ban fracking, but now she doesn't. She wanted to fund police, but now she doesn't. She wanted to open the border, but now she doesn't. She should have to answer for why she presents a different set of policies to one audience and a different set of policies to another audience. And I think that's what President Trump is getting at. This is a fundamentally fake person. She's different depending on who she's in front of.
And you all helped us win in 2020, and we're going to do it again in 2024.
With respect, you
Please.
changed your position on an important thing, which is Donald Trump.
Of course I did.
And so
I'm
why are
honest
you not a
about it.
chameleon?
Because, Dana, I've explained to the American people what's different. People change their minds when the facts change, they should. But if you want to be the people's vice president or president, you should have to stand before an interviewer and say, this is why I changed my mind. So to everybody who's seen that I criticized Donald Trump, since he asked the question, here are 2 things.
You didn't just criticize him. You said he could be America's Hitler.
Well, that's a criticism, and I didn't say that exactly, but set that to the side. What I said about Donald Trump and what I believed about Donald Trump, 2 things that really change. First of all, I didn't think Donald Trump would be a good president. He was a great president. Wages were rising. The world was more peaceful. Remember, when Donald Trump was running for president the first time, they said he would start World War III. He brought more peace to the world than any president of my lifetime.
JD is doing something that I'm sure Donald Trump trained him on, which is that if they come at you for character, just bring up policy instead. A great example is when Donald Trump was caught saying something not very nice on an Access Hollywood bus. He just instantly brought up horrible things that were happening around the world, so that a comment seems incomparable to death and destruction.
But this is locker room talk. You know, when we have a world where you have ISIS.
The second thing, Dana, is I believed, and I'm ashamed of it, I believed a lot of the media lies about Donald Trump in 2016. I believe that he said things like, for example, the media said Donald Trump accused all Mexicans of being rapists and criminals. You actually look at what he said, he did not say that at all. And I think it's important when you see something, you change your mind, and that's all I've done. And my pitch to the American people would be, I imagine a lot of folks who are thinking about voting for Donald Trump in 2024, maybe they've bought in to the media lies about him. Think for yourself, look at what he actually said, and I think you'll find that he's, one, a very engaging guy, but two, was a very good president.
If you guys like this episode of The Nate Freeman Show, you can check out another commentary I did for a different interview with Joe Biden. I'll see you there.